Здравствуйте, welcome back to Russian Through Propaganda. Today is day 13, and we're starting today to learn about Russian verbs. So remember, so far we've only looked at the verb быть, to be, right? So we talked about быть being an infinitive, right, ending in that soft T, and then we saw how to use that verb in the three tenses, right? We learned that Russian has only three tenses. Now, of course, we have a lot more to learn about verbs, including the most important thing, aspect, which will be quite challenging for students of Russian. But we're going to save that, we're going to put that aside for the moment and just simply talk about how to conjugate Russian verbs. So, what do we mean by conjugate? Well, we mean basically to take an infinitive like to be in English and then knowing how to use it to pair it with various subjects and in various tenses, right? Like I am, you are, he, she, it is, we are, you are, they are, etc. Right? You have to know that pattern. Um, Now, in English, that's usually pretty easy, right? Like I work, you work, he, she, it works, right? There's really a very limited number of forms or of endings we have to change to make a verb agree with its subject. But in Russian, we have a full set of conjugated forms, right? So we're going to start learning today how to conjugate Russian verbs. And unfortunately, this isn't a very easy topic. It's actually a rather difficult one. Um, the basic problem is that there are a number of verb types, or we could say conjugation patterns, right? Different verbs conjugate in different ways. They may take various endings. There may be certain changes that happen when we add certain endings. So it's a rather messy picture. And to make matters worse, the another major problem is that we often can't know what type a verb belongs to simply by looking at the infinitive. Um, right, so we'll talk about that more in a moment, but that's a bit of a problem, right? Some languages you're lucky, you can almost always tell how to conjugate a verb simply by looking at the infinitive. But again, in Russian, that's not usually going to be the case. So we have to be really careful in categorizing verbs and and learning the pattern for each given conjugation type. Now, with this, this is maybe one of the best examples of the approach this book takes. We're really going to do this very thoroughly and very meticulously. And, at times it may seem a little bit forced. Uh, uh, the bottom line is that there's really no getting around this, right? Because, first of all, our assumption is we really want to master Russian in the long run. We want to be able to handle any verb we encounter. And so that explains why I chose to do it this way, right? Just very, very carefully. By the way, I'm using a system I inherited from a professor of mine. I changed it a little bit, tweaked it a bit, but I'm basically using it as I found it. Um, anyway, but the bottom line is that there's if you plan on really learning Russian, not simply dabbling in it, you have to obviously learn all of these conjugation patterns. There's no escaping it, right? So my point of view is that assuming we're serious about Russian in the first place, we might as well start from the beginning by being very, very clear about how these different verb types work. Um, okay, so let's first just look at an example. What do we mean generally by conjugating Russian verbs? Well, look at an infinitive like chitать. Okay, it looks kind of like быть, right? It ends in a soft t, right? It ends in a soft t. That's our most common infinitive ending. So chitать means to read, right? It doesn't really have a subject. It's just kind of this, just describing the action generally. But if we want to pair that action with a subject, we've got to change the form. We've got to get rid of the infinitive ending, tsia, right, and add a personal ending, right? So let's now conjugate this verb читать to agree with these subjects. Я, ты, он, она, оно, мы, вы, они, right? Those are the pronouns we've learned already. And here are the verb forms. Let's just read through them. Я читаю, ты читаешь, он читает, or она читает, оно читает, third singular. Now over in the plural column, мы читаем, вы читаете, они читают. Okay, if we were just going to drill this verb, just the forms of the verb itself, we could say читаю, читаешь, читает, читаем, читаете, читают. And right off the bat today, we should hopefully get used to this idea that we are going to have to drill these verbs. again, it's one of these things students ask sometimes, like, is there a secret? And this kind of falls under the general question of how do I learn vocab, right? Well, I guess the short answer is no one's going to learn it for you, right? And there really is just no secret to learning it. You really just have to, I tell one thing I tell students is different ways of learning may suit your particular skills or proclivities, right? So for me, it's when I'm learning vocab, I like to write it out. I write it out a few times, try to pronounce it carefully as I'm writing it, and that's what does it for me, right? Other people may be more oral, right? You might want to hear it repeated. That might help more. But I think for most students, no matter what your sort of strong suit is, writing it out while saying it or hearing it, repeating it, and associating the written form with the spoken sound, the more times you do that, the more it will ingrain itself into your memory. Um, okay, so basically, we're going to talk about Russian verbs in terms of type, and we're going to use little labels to uh, tag them by type. So if we take this verb chitать, to read, we're going to call that an I-verb. I. Now, in each case, we'll talk a little bit about what this tag means. It's not completely arbitrary. Now, keep in mind that Russians would never tag verbs like this. They would never have to even think about things like this, right? How to categorize verbs, because they just learn the conjugation pattern sort of, with their mother's milk, so to speak. They don't have to think about it normally, right? So, of course, what we're going to be doing in the classroom here is somewhat artificial in the sense that Russians would never think about verbs this way, right? But again, we're not Russian. It's not just in our blood or whatever. We've got to learn it, and so we're going to try to do that as efficiently as we can. So we're going to call chitать an I-verb, and so that's a new verb type, I-verbs. They're going to follow their own conjugation pattern, which we've just seen. And so for each new type, we're going to have a head verb like chitать, right? So we could say that chitать is our head verb. It's sort of our model for the verb type I, right, for I-verbs. So hopefully we memorize the head verb, читаю, читаешь, читает, читаем, читаете, читают. And then if we get a new verb, a new I-verb, like отвечать, which means to answer, we can start practicing that by analogy to the head verb pattern we already learned, right? Читаю, читаешь, читает, читаем, читаете, читают. That suggests отвечаю, отвечаешь, отвечает, отвечаем, отвечаете, отвечают. Right? So the more of these verbs you drill, the more you practice them, the easier it will get to just ring off the conjugation pattern kind of more or less spontaneously. And then, of course, the most important part is being so familiar with the forms that in the flow of a sentence, you can just spit out the form you need of your verb to agree with whatever your subject is. Okay, so what defines a verb type in Russian? How do we lay out the rules for conjugating verbs that belong to a given type? Well, there are two things. First of all, what set of endings does the verb type take? There are only two sets of possible endings in Russian, so it's going to take either one or the other set of endings. The second thing is, do mutations occur? Okay, we'll talk more about that in a moment, but those are the two things we're going to be watching for. When we define a given type, usually it's going to boil down to those two things, right? What endings does the type take, and do we see any consonant mutations for this given type? Okay, now we just mentioned there are only two sets of endings in Russian, at least for regular verbs. We're going to refer to those as the yo endings and the e endings. Okay, today and tomorrow we're going to spend three lessons here on introducing conjugation patterns. And to make things simpler, we're going to start by looking exclusively at your endings, right? So all the verb types we're going to see today are going to take your endings. And here they are, right? U, yosh, yot, yom, yotie, ut. Okay? Now look at there's one variation. Instead of u, we may have a u appearing in certain verb types, right? We're going to talk more about that later. Right, so again, you can think of that as just a soft variant of u, right? U, yosh, yot, yom, yotie, ut. Okay, very important. We're going to call these your endings, but remember how your works, right? Your can only appear in a stressed syllable, right? So we're going to talk more about stress patterns in a moment, but if it so happened that the stress in a given verb form fell somewhere other than the ending, right? That is, if the stress didn't fall on the your, then of course we can't have your. So instead we would have yeah, right? So let's imagine quickly if these endings were not stressed, then instead of the your everywhere, we'd get yeah, and the endings would be u, yesh, yet, yem, yetje, ut, right? So again, we'll see examples of that in practice later, but that's an important point to keep in mind. By the way, let's look at a quick poster, and we see two more verbs, baltać, pomagać, that are also I-verbs like chitać, right? So they're going to follow that same pattern. Here we have them, of course, in infinitive forms. To babble is to help the enemy. Baltać means to babble. Pomagać means to help. And here we have the word vrag, or enemy, in the dative case, which we haven't learned yet. Okay, so quickly, let's just think. We learned chitać. I've just told you that baltać follows the same pattern. So let's see if we can, well, I'll just show you how to do it. I'm sure you can't do it quite at this point, right? It's very early. Okay, so if we have chitać giving us chitayo, chitayish, chitayet, right, then baltać gives us baltayo, baltayish, baltayet, right? We'll just stick to the singular for now. What about pomagać? Well, let's think back to our head verb, chitayo, chitayish, chitayet. That suggests pomagayo, pomagayish, pomagayet, right? So you see how those are all following the same pattern. Let's talk quickly about verb structure in the first place. How are Russian verbs built? Well, here I just have three examples of different forms, right? Some of these are conjugated, some, and then we have one in infinitive, right? It doesn't really matter. We're just picking apart various verb forms and showing what they consist of. Some verbs will have, like, let's look at the form prochitayu. That means they will read. Here we have a prefix, pro. Okay, we'll learn a lot more about prefixes later. Right, so a prefix is a little particle that comes in front of the verb, right before the verb. Then, of course, at the end, we have our verb ending, ut, right? We just learned that ending. That's the personal ending, third plural ending. Then at the very heart of the verb, we have a root, right? The essential part of the verb is its root. In this case, chit, which has to do with reading. That's just a very basic little building block of Slavic words called a root, chit, to which here we've added a suffix, I. So the root plus the suffix, if there is a suffix, that gives us our verb stem, right? Chitai is our verb stem. And by the way, that shows us why we're calling verbs like this I-verbs. I is the stem suffix that is used to create this verb in the first place, right? And we see that it's actually a part of the certain conjugated verb forms, right? So it's not something we're just making up randomly, of course. It's telling us something about the structure of the verb type, right? I-verbs have the suffix I. That's how they're built. Look at a second verb, napisать. This is an infinitive we're giving here, right? You see the prefix, na, the ending, here the infinitive ending, soft T. And again, we have a root, piece, which means, has to do with writing. And in this case, a stem, vowel, right? So also a kind of suffix, but really just a vowel, right? Ah. Right, so the root plus the stem vowel gives us our stem. And indeed, we're going to refer to this verb type as A-verbs because they're built by adding the stem vowel A to the root, right? So there's a second verb type. We're going to learn more about that later. Finally, we have non-suffixed verbs, which when we say non-suffix, we basically just means they have no suffix, right? All they are, they simply have a root, which is the stem, right? There's no suffix, no stem vowel, no anything added to it. And then we add the endings directly to the stem, or the root, which is the stem, right? So živ is our root, meaning having to do with living. And then we add the personal endings to conjugate the verb živu, for example, I live. By the way, all non-suffix verbs take your endings. We'll talk more about that later. Okay, what about stress patterns in conjugated verbs? We know already that stress is really important and very difficult in Russian, so whenever we can make some kind of generalization about how stress may shift around, we want to be very careful to nail that down, because otherwise it can seem just completely hopeless. Okay, so the point to be made today, and we'll review this many times, is that for regular Russian verbs, there are only 3 possible stress patterns. This is true of all Russian verb types, all conjugated forms. There are only 3 possible patterns. So let's look at examples of these 3 patterns and get a first look at how these play out. The 3 patterns are stem stress, end stress, and shifting stress. Okay, let's start with stem stress and see what that looks like. Читать. Okay, our forms here are читаю, читаешь, читает, читаем, читаете, читают. Okay, and then we have an imperative, читай. We'll talk about that more in one moment. Okay, so look what's happened with the stress. It stayed on the same syllable throughout all conjugated forms. Right? Now, where is that stress syllable? Is it part of the ending or part of the stem? Well, of course, it's part of the stem, right? Now, again, that helps remind us that we don't say chitayos, chitayot, chitayom, right? We can't have a yor if the stress isn't on the ending, right? So here we are adding the yor endings, but we're not adding yor. Instead, we're adding yeah. Right, so one more time. Читаю, читаешь, читает, читаем, читаете, читают. Stem stress, meaning the stress is staying on the same syllable on the stem throughout all of the forms. Okay, what about end stress? Let's take the verb жить, meaning to live. The conjugated forms are живу, живешь, живет, живем, живете, живут. And then the imperative, the command is живи. Okay, where's the stress? It's on the ending, right? It's on the ending and it stays there throughout all of the forms. We're going to call that pattern end stress, right? Stress is always on the ending, never moves. Живу, живешь, живет, живем, живете, живут. Okay, that leaves us one pattern, shifting stress. And the most important thing to note here is that when we say shifting stress, we mean this pattern and this pattern only. There's only one shifting stress pattern, right? So it's tempting to think maybe when we say shifting stress, we mean that the stress can bounce around in any number of ungodly ways, right? No, it's actually relatively good news, right? If the stress in conjugated verb forms does shift, it's always going to shift according to this pattern. Again, the only exception to this are truly irregular verbs. We're going to mention that later in this, maybe not today, but in this chapter. And bear in mind, there are very few irregular verbs in Russian, truly irregular verbs. Really, there are only a handful of them, right? So this goes for the vast majority of verbs, right? Stress will only shift in this way. Namely, we get end stress in the first singular, right, in the ya form, the stress is on the ending, and then it shifts back onto the stem for all the remaining forms, right? So that's shifting stress. That's the only shifting stress pattern. When we say a verb has shifting stress, we mean exactly this pattern and none other. So let's read it out. Пишу, пишешь, пишет, пишем, пишите, пишут. Look how it jumps back, and the arrow is, of course, pointing that out. Пишу, right? Let me say that even more clearly. Пишу, пишу, right? Not пишу, but пишу, right? Stress on the ending. But in the other forms, it jumps back. Пишешь, пишет, пишем, пишите, пишут. Okay, that brings us to our third and final spelling rule, which is going to affect the first singular form and the third plural form in some cases. Okay, so I've given you all 3 letters again here just to review. All 3 rules. Today we're adding the 8-letter rule, which tells us pretty simply that after all 8 letters, Right now, remember all 8 letters. That means the 4 hushings: zh, ch, sh, sh. Right, 4 hushings. The 3 velars, right? G, ka, ch, right? And then the odd man out, ts, right? So that gives us eight letters, right? So the third and final spelling rule involves all 8 letters, and it tells us that we can't write ya or you after those 8 letters. We can never write that combination, right? But we're going to see today that rule, for now at least, is going to be most prominent in terms of verb endings. But remember that it's universally valid, right? So this isn't specific just to today's content, but it's universally true. We can never have those combinations. So let's take an example, right, of this verb to write we just looked at, right? And let's imagine we're writing out the forms and we want to say I write, and we write pishu, right? Well, that combination can never happen in Russian, right? And the 8 letter rule reminds us that after the sh, right, we can't write you. Instead, we have to write u, right? So that would help us arrive at the correct form, which is pishu, pishu with an u. Same thing in the third plural, right? We might want to write pishut with a u, right? They write. But 8 letter rule tells us we can't have that. We can't have sh plus a u. Instead, we have to write u, and we get pishut, pishut. Okay, so we'll keep uh, revisiting that rule as we come to examples of when it might be applicable. Now let's very quickly mention what is an imperative. We're not going to study that in depth until later, right? We can't just overwhelm ourselves with every last verb form right at once. But as you've noticed already, I'm going to include the basic imperative form in these verb tables, just so we can get a sense of it. Maybe if you're ambitious, you could go ahead and start uh, learning those as part of the paradigm, which would be wonderful. But we're going to talk in more detail later about how they're formed. Again, so for now, they're just kind of there for extra information and to give us a more complete look at all the forms of a given verb. But basically, look at this propaganda poster. Nie baltai, nie baltai, don't babble. We already learned that verb baltai. We learned that it's an I-verb. And we see that in this case, the infinitive, the imperative form, which is used to give commands, like don't babble, right, giving a command, it sometimes happens that the imperative form is simply the bare stem of the verb. And we see there that I suffix that we're using to tag this verb type, right? Baltach is an I verb, and its imperative is baltai, right? Baltai would mean babble, right? Giving a command. Don't babble, we negate it and we get niebaltai, niebaltai. Okay, by the way, the inscription up there is «Будь начеку, в такие дни подслушивают стены, недалеко от болтовни и сплетни до измены». Okay, so it's a little rhyming couplet, I guess, there, right? Be on guard. In days like these, the walls are listening. It's not far from babbling and gossiping to treachery. So don't babble, right? Loose lips sink ships. If we look at a couple of other imperative forms, chitai is a ti imperative, right? That's the basic form, that ti imperative that we're going to be giving in our conjugation tables. Now, if we want to be polite, right, and give a polite command using vi, or if we want to give a command to more than one person, we would also use the vi form. And to get that imperative, that vi imperative, we simply add tia to the ti imperative, right? So from chitai, we get chitaitie. From pishi, we get pishitie. From jivi, we get jivitie. Okay, so that's just a very basic introduction to these forms, right? You have a ti imperative, you have a vi imperative, you get by adding tia. But again, we're going to talk a lot about that a lot more later. So for now, let's just file that away and not worry too much about it. Okay, so today we want to learn 2 verb types. Let's start with the one we've seen already, I-verbs. Okay, part of mastering Russian verb types is to get a feel for which ones are really common, right? So that if you encounter a new verb And again, you can't necessarily tell by looking at the infinitive what type it belongs to. You can at least guess statistically which type is more likely, right? And then, of course, you could always consult a dictionary to find out for sure how it's going to conjugate. But we can start today by saying that I-verbs are extremely common. There are tons and tons of them. And ultimately, for various reasons, they are the most common type of verb in Russian. We'll find out more why that's true later. I think in book 2, and especially in books 3 and 4, we'll talk about this in some detail. Okay, so how do we define I-verbs? Well, we need to mention two things. First, they take the your endings, right? That's the set of endings they take, and they never mutate. Okay, so those two things can help us remember how this verb type is going to operate. Okay, we've already seen our head verb, right? Let's look over a few examples here. Our head verb was chitать. So that's telling us how these verbs conjugate. There's nothing more to it really than memorizing that pattern and then applying it to new verbs, right? So again, don't think that there's some secret to this. You have to just somehow beat that pattern into your head, right? And then repeat it as often as possible and using it with as many new verbs as possible, right? You should think of it almost like I usually talk about like shooting hoops or whatever, right? You need to develop muscle memory. And part of that is just sheer repetition, right? The more you do it, the more effortlessly it will seem to become. Okay, so let's review our head verb. Читать, there's the infinitive. It's an I verb. It means to read. Okay, so let's conjugate the forms. Читаю, читаешь, читает. Читаем, читаете, читают. And then the imperative читай, but we're not really concerned with that at the moment. Okay, now I'm giving you here all of the I verbs we're going to see in this chapter, right? I think they're all here. So let's take a new one like думать. Okay, we've never seen that verb in our life, right? I'm telling you it means to think. The infinitive is думать, and I'm telling you it's an I verb. Okay, now that I've told you those things, you should be able to conjugate the verb already, right? Like magic. Думаю, думаешь, думает, думаем, думаете, думают. Okay, note where the stress is. It's on the oo, right? That is, it's somewhere on the stem and it's going to stay there, right? All of these I verbs have stem stress, right? The stress is somewhere on the stem and it's going to stay there throughout all of the forms. Let's do one like терять. Now you see this one is a soft stem, so we're getting a ya instead of an a, but it's still the same verb type, right? So we get терять, that's the infinitive, to lose, and the pattern is теряю, теряешь, теряет, теряем, теряете, теряют, right? I lose, you lose, he, she, it loses, we lose, you plural lose, they lose. Знать, to know. Знаю, знаешь, знает, знаем, знаете, знают. Let's try работать, to work. Работаю, работаешь, работает, работаем, работаете, работают. Делать, to do. Делаю, делаешь, делает, делаем, делаете, делают. Okay, here's a longer one. Спрашивать means to ask. Спрашиваю, спрашиваешь, спрашивает, спрашиваем, спрашиваете, спрашивают. It might take some practice to keep the stress there on that first syllable, despite all of the unstressed syllables that follow. Отдыхать, to relax, also an I verb. Отдыхаю, отдыхаешь, отдыхает, отдыхаем, отдыхаете, отдыхают. Слушать, to listen. Слушаю, слушаешь, слушает, слушаем, слушаете, слушают. Понимать, meaning to understand. Понимаю, понимаешь, понимает, понимаем, понимаете, понимают. Okay, let's try just filling in some of these forms in the exercise in 13a. Okay, the trick here is to watch your subject, right? What is the subject of the sentence? And we've got to make sure the verb form agrees with the subject, right? So look at the examples. Что ты делаешь? Okay, a question. Our subject is ты, so our verb form has to be делаешь, right? We need the ты form of the verb. Okay, an answer comes with the subject я. Я работаю и слушаю музыку. Look at those forms. Я is your subject. We need работаю, слушаю, right? And now more examples. Я читаю книгу, но плохо понимаю. Right? Again, я is our subject. I'm reading a book, but I poorly understand. Я понимаю плохо. Okay, so we look those over. We've got the same subject. Работаю, слушаю, читаю, понимаю. Right? It's the same form, same subject across the board. Okay, what is he doing? Что он, see if you can fill in the right form, делает. Что он делает? Third singular. Okay, answer. He's working and listening to music. He's reading a book, but understands badly, poorly. Он работает и слушает музыку. Он читает книгу, но плохо понимает. Okay, number 2, we, right? What are we doing? Well, now we are doing these things. Что мы делаем? Мы работаем и слушаем музыку. Мы читаем книгу, но плохо понимаем. Okay, number 3, она. Okay, so another third singular. Что она делает? What is she doing? Она работает и слушает музыку. Она читает книгу, но плохо понимает. Okay, number 4, они. So now we're in third plural. Что они делают? Что они делают? Они работают и слушают музыку. Они читают книгу, но плохо понимают. Okay, so ют everywhere. Вы. Что вы делаете? Что вы делаете? What are you guys doing? Or what are you, singular polite, doing? Вы работаете и слушаете музыку. Вы читаете книгу, но плохо понимаете. So, те are the endings we're adding everywhere. Okay, все. Now remember that's third plural, everyone, all the people, literally. All are doing. What are all doing? What are all the people doing? What is everyone doing? Что делают все? Все работают и слушают музыку. Everyone's working and listening to music. Все читают книгу, но плохо понимают. Right? So ют. Right? Все takes third plural forms. One more with ты. Ты. Что ты делаешь? Я работаю и слушаю музыку. Я читаю книгу, но плохо понимаю. Okay, same as in the example. Okay, here's a great Russian proverb I love. Глаза боятся, а руки делают. Right? The eyes fear, but the hands do. Right? Okay, so it means you can't believe you're actually going through with something, right? It's almost as if you're an onlooker to your own action. Right? The eyes fear and the hands do. By the way, the verb form бояться, we haven't covered that verb type yet, so it looks a little bit funny to us right now. Again, we're not going to understand every last bit of these proverbs just yet. Okay, let's practice, just do some more examples. Вы работаете сейчас? Нет, я отдыхаю, наконец. Я ничего не делаю. Right? So a question, are you working right now? Are you guys working? Actually, this is clearly a polite use of вы, right? Are you working right now? Because the response is yeah. No, I'm relaxing finally. I'm not doing anything. Okay, just making sure the verbs agree with the subject. Она работает сейчас. Is she working now? Нет, она отдыхает, наконец. No, she's relaxing. Она ничего не делает. She's not doing anything. Okay, what about он? Он работает сейчас. Is he working now? Нет, он отдыхает, наконец. Он ничего не делает. Okay, what about они, number 3? Они работают сейчас. Они работают сейчас. Нет, они отдыхают, наконец. Они отдыхают. They're relaxing. Они ничего не делают. Okay, what about ты? Ты работаешь сейчас? Нет, я отдыхаю. Я отдыхаю, наконец. Я ничего не делаю. I'm relaxing, I'm not doing anything. Right, a few questions you might try answering. Что ты делаешь сегодня? Работаешь или отдыхаешь? Right, what are you doing today? Are you working or relaxing? Or number two, ты слушаешь, God, ты слушаешь музыку, когда работаешь? Do you listen to music while you are working? Number three, ты много работаешь? Очень много. Do you work a lot? A whole lot, right? Really a lot? Очень много. Ты часто теряешь зонт? Do you lose your umbrella often? A телефон, a рюкзак. Okay, note the follow-up question starting with right? What about your telephone? What about your backpack? Do you lose those often? Okay, so you've seen now how to drill new verbs, right? So let's imagine we're reading a text, and of course, later in book 2, and especially books 3 and 4, when we start reading text, we're going to have all sorts of new verbs thrown at us, and we're going to tag them by type. And so that means that by then, hopefully, if we've done our homework, we can just ring off the conjugation like it's second nature, right? So let's take a few funny verbs that we're not really learning right now, but let's just practice drilling the pattern, right? So let's just take one example, or maybe two. Чихать, to sneeze. Okay, that's an I verb. Well, let's think the head verb. Читаю, читаешь, читает, читаем, читаете, читают. Okay, let's try to apply that to чихать. Чихаю, чихаешь, чихает, чихаем, чихаете, чихают. Right, to sneeze. Let's look at one more, гулять. Okay, that's another soft stem, right? So maybe a little bit different. We've got ya instead of but it's still the same pattern. To stroll, гуляю, гуляешь, гуляет, гуляем, гуляете, гуляют. Okay, yeah, I stroll, you stroll, he, she, it strolls, etc. Okay, we have just one more verb type to learn today, and unfortunately, we see what I alluded to earlier, right? That the infinitive often doesn't tell us a whole lot about how a Russian verb actually works. So look at our new head verb, писать. And we've mentioned already, we're going to call that an A-verb because all of these verbs in this category are built by adding the stem vowel A to the root, right? In this case, pis plus A plus for example, the infinitive ending that gives us pisать. Okay, by the way, remember that if we get the stress wrong and say pisać, that means to piss, right? By the way, while I'm on the topic, pisać is an I verb, right? So if you want to say I piss, you piss, he, she, it pisses, that's pisayu, pisash, right? So you see how important, again, these conjugation types are. Now, pisać, to write, is an A verb. It doesn't work anything like the verbs we've learned so far, like those I-verbs, right? Now, sometimes students forget that and they conjugate it like an I verb. And then if, God forbid, on top of that, they misplace the stress, then they get the perfect conjugated forms of to piss. Pisayu, pisash, pisayed, etc. Okay, so that might be kind of a funny joke, but unfortunately, it really takes on tragic tones when students are talking about pissing all the time. And again, I'm not just saying this to be cute or funny or whatever. It really happens all the time. It happens in class. It happens when people go to Russia. I've heard stories about how they're at the dinner table and Lord knows what they're talking about because they don't know how to conjugate verbs. Okay, so it's kind of a funny example, but it's a telling one. Okay, so pisać is an A verb. It's not an I verb. But to look at the infinitive, you might think that читать and pisać are going to work in exactly the same way, right? The infinitives both end in ать. Okay, so again, very importantly, just because an infinitive ends in ать doesn't really mean anything. It could be an I verb, it could be an A verb, and in fact, it could be any number of other types of verbs that we're not even learning today, right? So the infinitive often tells us very little. Okay, pisać is an A verb. How does it work? What does that mean? It means that it takes yule endings and we see mutations in all forms. Okay, so that's what makes an adverb tick. Okay, what do we mean by mutations? We mean that in certain positions, and this is for historic reasons, we're going to have to, again, I could do a little mini unit. I will maybe at some point later, where we can explain historically why these mutations occur, and it's actually really interesting. Um, anyway, I may do a supplementary video on that or something. But again, for present purposes, we just need to learn what the mutations are. A mutation basically means that in certain positions, a given consonant will mutate into a different consonant. It will become a different consonant, uh, just sort of for no apparent reason, right? Now, again, historically there are reasons, but we don't need to get into that right now. Okay, so what one thing that defines an A-verb is that the final stem consonant will mutate in all forms. All conjugated forms see this pattern. Let's start by looking at pisać, to write. Its final consonant is s, right? S. Okay, that mutates to sh. Okay, when the consonant s mutates, it mutates to sh. And that's what we get here. Pishu, pishish, pishit, pishim, pishitye, pishut. Again, we've got sh in all of these forms. See how it's changed in all the forms. Okay, let's go to another verb like napisać. That's the perfective verb meaning to write. We'll learn more about what that means later. For now, we're just worried about how to conjugate it. Well, all we've changed here really is added the prefix na, so the basic verb forms are going to be the same. Napishu, napishish, napishit, napishim, napishitye, napishut. Okay, another adverb is plakać, to cry. Okay, that's an A-verb, so its final consonant is going to mutate in all the conjugated forms. Ka mutates to ch, right? So we get plachu, plachish, plachit, plachim, plachitye, plachut. Skazać is also an A-verb. We see here we have a z, right? Z mutates to zh, right? And so here we see that in all the forms. Skaju, skajish, skajit, skajim, skajitye, skajut. Pokazać is also a z, right? Ends in a z. It's also an A-verb. We see the same pattern. Pokaju, pakajish, pakajit, pakajim, pakajitye, pakajut. As we go through the verb types, we'll maybe talk a little bit about stress, right? And we see here that for A-verbs, first of all, look at plakać. Plakać, if we look at the infinitive, the stress is already on the stem in the infinitive. If we see that, we can know for certain that it's going to be stem stressed everywhere, right? So if we look at the infinitive, the stress is already on the stem, like plakać, we know it's going to stay there for certain. Plachu, plachish, plachit, etc. If the stress isn't on the stem of the infinitive, then things are more difficult. But for A-verbs, for this particular type, if the infinitive is in-stressed, right, pisać, napisać, skazać, pokazać, for A-verbs, we can be certain that they're going to show shifting stress, right? So they're going to be on the ending in the ya form, but they're going to shift backwards in all remaining forms, like, right, pakaju, but then pakajish, pakajit, pakajim, pakajit, pakajit, and then the imperative pakaji. The imperative, again, we'll talk about later. That's a different story. Okay. So let's just do a quick exercise with some A-verbs and we'll call it a day. Что ты делаешь? Я пишу письмо и плачу. What are you doing? I'm writing a letter and crying. Почему ты плачешь? Why are you crying? I won't say and I won't show the letter. Okay, so just a silly little dialogue. Now note that only the first verb, right, in the question, делать, that's an I-verb. All the others are these new A-verbs we've just learned. So we've got to watch out for the mutations and adding the right endings. Okay, first row. Что он делает? What's he doing? Что он делает? Он пишет письмо и плачет. He's writing a letter and crying. Пишет и плачет. Почему он плачет? Why is he crying? Не скажет, right? He won't say. Не скажет. И письмо не покажет. He won't say and he won't show the letter. Okay, let's take они, third plural. Что они делают? Что они делают? What are they doing? Они пишут письмо и плачут. Right? Пишут, плачут. Third plural. They are writing a letter and crying. Почему они плачут? Why are they crying? Не скажут. They won't say. And they won't show the letter. И письмо не покажут. Okay, one more. Что вы делаете? What are you all doing? We're writing a letter and crying. Мы пишем письмо и плачем. Пишем, плачем. Почему вы плачете? Why are you crying? Не скажем. We won't say and we won't show the letter. Не скажем и письмо не покажем. Okay, so that does it for these first two verb types. Try to learn the paradigms very clearly. Also, file away in your mind that the I-verbs are much, much more common. So we want to maybe be especially careful then to really circle the ones that are A-verbs and learn them as being a little bit funny and a little more difficult, right? Whereas the I-verbs are rather easy and they're extremely common. So that's one pattern you're going to get used to very quickly. Okay, I won't get too creative with the ending today. I'll just play with the toy for a moment. And I think we've all had enough of Russian verbs today. We'll spend 2 more days on these conjugation patterns, and then we'll turn to more interesting topics like verbal aspect, which is also quite hellish in its way for beginning students. But we'll deal with it somehow. Until then, до свидания, товарищи.